So I don't know if you've heard, but we have a national federal election coming up in the next couple of days that could have some pretty important ramifications when it comes to government policy, the economy, and of course, housing. And a very important part of the discussions, debates, and promises made by some of these larger parties do involve housing and affordability, as prices seem to just keep taking off without any sort of abatement. And I'm skeptical about whether any one party actually has any power to be able to fix the housing affordability crisis in the 4 years that they're in power for. Because the questions and the answers really center around the fact that the global population is growing. The population in Canada and the Toronto region is growing because we're getting a demographic shift of younger people who are now grown up and they need more space, which absolutely affects supply, because back in the day when the boomers had their children, they had maybe 2, 3, 4 kids all living under one roof. And now they need to grow and they need to expand and buy their own properties. It's simple, isn't it? Plus, you want to factor in immigration and people moving here for work and getting their PR status or Canadian citizenship. We simply do not have enough homes for everybody here. But if it makes you feel any better, this is not just a Canadian or a Toronto problem, it's a global problem, where every major city or country is experiencing growth in their population and expansion in housing. Some of the larger metropolises have already been through this already. They've gone through, different waves of growth in their population. We just so happen to be experiencing it now here in Toronto because, well, we're in the north. But of course, it's always nice to debate and pontificate about what would or could happen. And I'm going to spell out a few of those platform promises from the 3 major parties here in Canada. And just because you talk about it all the time, it doesn't mean things are going to happen. I wish I could become the richest man in the world, richer than Jeff Bezos, but that doesn't mean, and it's not likely to happen. Well, it's definitely not going to happen before an age where I can actually really enjoy it. But the Gen X in me is a little bit skeptical, in fact, even a little bit cynical about whether these promises can actually even be fulfilled, and to be able to put an actual dent in the housing market prices and just slow it down just a little bit. But just for a little bit of fun, we'll do a quick little rundown, and in this video I'm going to focus a little bit more on the supply, not so much on those small sort of tweaks and adjustments that the political parties can make, such as making changes to the mortgage stress test. We're really going to focus on supply here. So here's what the Liberals are promising. They're looking to build, preserve, and repair 1.4 million properties. They're looking to convert empty commercial space into housing. And they're looking to add $2.7 billion more funding to social housing program. And they want to put a ban on blind bidding. Okay, so maybe that's a topic for another time, but maybe I'll make a video about whether banning blind bidding will actually work or not. Okay, so not bad, Liberals. Of course, I'm impressed with that 1.4 million number. Isn't clear exactly how much of that is going towards social housing, which in theory should bring down the price of properties if there's enough supply at the right times. But of course, to be able to implement that and bring that many houses onto the market, even in 20 years, is an impressive feat. Okay, and now on to the Conservatives. The plan is to incentivize the private sector to build more houses. And I think they're looking to target 1 million new houses. They're looking to switch 15% of federally owned land into housing and exploring using office space converted to housing. Possibly looking to propose a 7 to 10 year mortgage term versus the 5-year terms that we're seeing with banks and lenders today. That could be helpful in terms of lowering the price per month for future homeowners. And there's a long list of other things that they're presenting and proposing to win the election, but we're just going to focus on the supply issue today. Again, it's a nice attempt and it's a really good number, 1 million houses, because experts are predicting that we'll need about 1.8 million new houses, I think, in the next 20 or 30 years here in Canada. But then, of course, being the Conservatives, they're looking to promote the business aspect and the private sector in terms of building more properties. But of course, if you're adding more inventory stock into the private markets or into the quote-unquote public markets, then prices are just going to be dictated by market conditions. So that's not really going to help lower the prices here in Toronto and in Canada. And again, the Conservatives are not indicating how much of that 1 million in housing is going towards social and lower income housing. It's not clear. And now on to the NDP. They're looking to spend $14 billion on 500,000 new units in the next decade. They're looking to accelerate the application process for co-ops and social housing with an initiative called Fast Start Funds. They would like to increase the amortization period from 25 years to 30 years for potential homeowners and especially first-time buyers to, help lower that monthly cost. And of course, impose a 20% sales tax on foreign buying activity. So while yes, these are all very impressive numbers and they're great numbers in terms of saying, yeah, we're going to do this, right? But I mean, come on, it's the Canadian authoritarian government we're talking about here. I don't even think communist China could pull off these kind of numbers, and they're an authoritarian government. I mean, maybe, just maybe within those 4 years, they might be able to get pen to paper and have something signed. And by the time that's done, you're going to have a new regime coming in 4 years later. And so to come up with numbers like 1 million houses in 3 years or 4 years or 1.4 million houses and properties is downright absurd, ridiculous, and just delusional. Because we can't even build a mid-rise condo in 4 years. How are you going to build 1 million properties in 4 years? I mean, I think the NDP's numbers are a little bit more reasonable and practical. And there was a program that started in the 60s. Over the span of over 3 decades, all the way into the 90s, they built something like 550,000 social housing units across Canada. 30 plus years to build 500,000 homes. And so clearly you will need continuity. You will need opposing parties to all get on the same page and to allow for this to happen beyond just one regime. So, you're not going to be able to hack your way through this, because this is going to have to require a coordinated effort amongst all the parties to make a decision to say, I'm going to help Canadians with either affordable and more social housing or some other way to incentivize or allow people to get into home ownership. And of course, certainly to invest in more rental properties so that people who are just starting out have somewhere affordable that they can stay and live in. And so while granted, since 2017 under the Trudeau government, under the National Housing Strategy, they were able to accomplish around 63,000 housing units for people all across Canada. So that's roughly 20,000 units per year since 2017. But by the sounds of it from the experts, we really need a whole lot more, somewhere around 1.8 million. And for those of you who aren't familiar, many housing and planning decisions actually fall to the city and the municipal level. So it's not like a country like Japan where it's federally mandated to say, we're going to build more houses here. Here in Canada, in Toronto, in Ontario, it's more democratic than that, and we have multiple layers of government. And when it comes to housing and planning, that actually falls to the city level. And so, it doesn't really matter necessarily what the federal governments are saying or promising, because they have to work with the cities and be able to negotiate and make it happen at the city level. And so that's really where the problem is, and where things get really, really stuck, is all the red tape and bureaucracy and the inability to actually implement and take action. So doesn't really matter what you promise, doesn't really matter what you say, and it's even harder to build in areas where you really, really need them. Because of course here in Toronto, a lot of the jobs are centered in this GTA region, and so you need housing for people to live here in order to work here, in order to support the economy, not just at the city level, but at the national taxable level. All right, so what are you trying to say, Pete? So all these ideas and platform promises are nice. They're nice to talk about. But in fact, if we wanted to actually solve this housing crisis, it would have been done 10 years or maybe even 20 years ago. Because the government has actually interfered less in housing matters. I guess it's probably because it's so difficult to manage properties, and even working with construction companies and dealing with cities to try to make things happen. So the responsibility has fallen more on the private sector, and for you out there as a buyer, seller, investor, individually. And I just don't see the housing market being slowed down in any way, because of course all the monetary policy, the interest rates, the fact that they're not really supporting rental properties and social housing as much anymore. And with cities, nations, and countries growing all around the world, we just need more housing, period, everywhere. And while I am definitely a strong proponent of social housing for people who really, really need it, who are really struggling, you're definitely not going to be able to do it without the help of the private sector, and you're not going to be able to get anything done if you don't have good relationships and partnerships with people at the city level. I mean, it's more likely we'll see things like the hybrid model where they tore down Regent Park and then they rebuilt it with private condominiums, but also social housing units in those new communities as part of an additional phase. I just have a real problem with the numbers that they're talking about, because they're just pie in the sky. Because yeah, you could build 1,000 new housing units in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, but that's not really where people are going, and that's not really where they're living and employed for jobs. So my point is to all the politicians out there, just be real with people. Be realistic. Give them the truth, and give them a reasonable and feasible game plan and strategy, and show your results so that we can buy into the next great political story that lasts more than 4 years, with actual tangible results and without all this grandstanding. The truth is, if you really want to get a grip on the housing market, one of the things that you could do is you probably have to limit the amount of investor properties and units owned by citizens and permanent residents here. So if, for example, you limited any one individual or any one corporation from buying more than 2 or 3 properties, that will put an immediate slowdown. I just don't see the supply side issues and problems being resolved anytime soon. And so if you put a hard limit on the amount of investor properties and units that people could own, then that might actually have some sort of impact and dent on the housing market here in Toronto, the GTA, all across Canada. But is this possible? Is this something that we want? And is it anti-capitalistic? These are very, very important identity type questions that we have to ask ourselves as Canadians. Do we want to be a place where the rich just keep getting richer and richer and richer, pricing out future buyers who haven't even been conceived or arrived yet because of the limited amount of supply of homes that are driven by market forces? These are very important questions, and we really have to start asking them now so that they can be implemented in 10 and 20 years. So all in all, no, I don't think any one political party is going to be able to solve the housing problems and affordability crisis in 4 years, probably not even in 10 years. And real estate now is no longer local, it's also global too, because people move around, they immigrate. And yes, there is some foreign buying and activity and speculation, but that's completely overblown, and there's a lack of education around who these types of people are. So really all the best that we can expect from these parties is they're going to make some minor adjustments and tweaks, say in the mortgage stress test, maybe have some influence on interest rates, introduce some other policies to sort of lightly tap on the brakes and slow down the market. But we just don't see any significant movements and implementation that will actually put a dent in the affordability problems here in the major cities across Canada. But anyway, guys, I hope you guys like this video. It's a little bit different from what I normally talk about. But yeah, if we're truly intent on solving really big problems, we have to come up with big solutions. So I hope you guys like this video. Please hit the subscribe button, give us a like, throw us up a comment, let us know what you think, and we'll see you back to regular programming in the next one. Talk to you soon, and bye for now. It's another topic for another time, but maybe I'll do a video about whether banning blind. But maybe that's a topic for another time. But maybe I could make a video about whether banning blind.